Before we start this episode, I'd like to do a quick shout out to our allies Personio for making this episode possible.
All right.
Should we do a deep breath before we start? See, it's better, right?
It is. All right. And we're back this week. Oh no, that's not how we start. Have you got 5 minutes? The phrase that sends chills down the spine to HR people all around the world. I'm Florentine, a people and culture specialist.
And I'm Paul, and as a senior people and culture professional, I've got this question a lot. That seemingly innocent question that turns into a big topic, an unexpected turn of events, or a really complex problem. Let's face it, it's rarely ever just 5 minutes. Join us as we dive into the weird, funny, and strange situations we encounter in our day-to-day work. Hey, Flo.
Hey, Paul.
So I see that you brought a guest this time.
Yes, because this week we're going to talk about the topic mental well-being. And that is why we have invited Emma White, a psychologist at Open Up. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Florentine and Paul.
Hey, Emma.
Hi.
Really nice having you. Maybe you can give us a brief introduction and tell a bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I work as a psychologist at Open Up. I speak to clients day to day on all topics that can be going on regarding their mental well-being. So it's not just things about work, but it can also be personal things or things outside of them and their families that can also be going on. I also facilitate lots of group sessions in where we also try to help clients, but on more broader topics that can be relevant for a group of people. So that's kind of my psychology background, but I've also worked in HR, in learning and development. So also nice to be here from that angle, I suppose, as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
So I think, Flo, you picked the perfect guest because it's like used to work in HR, now psychologist, like bridges the two worlds really well.
Yeah,
nice one.
I think so too. And thanks again for coming. And let's dive right in, because mental well-being is quite a hot topic these days, I would say, especially I think in the start scale-up world where we are working in. And I was actually reading an article and it stated that according to the World Health Organization, mental health conditions cost the global economy $1 trillion annually in loss in productivity. It's quite a high number. So maybe from your experience, Emma, how do you see the conversation around mental well-being in the workplace have evolved in the past few years?
Yeah, a really good question. I think mainly positive developments. Obviously, it's more on the agenda. It's more talked about. We are sharing more about how we're doing. And I think companies are really realizing, right, we need to do something about this. And they're applying more resources. They're training managers. They're trying to lead by example themselves. So I think they're all really positive developments if you compare to not even a couple of years ago where things like reintegration and talking about how you are really doing was kind of like a no-go.
Yeah.
So I think those are really, really positive things. And I think we still have a long way to go as well. I think we're obviously addressing this more because we need to address it more.
Yeah.
But the way that we're doing it, is that the right way to be doing it? I'm just wondering sometimes if we're really addressing the root cause as to why this is becoming more of an issue. And it's great that we're doing all these things, but I think there's a lot more that we can do as organizations, or we have a responsibility there as well.
So I guess there's like two sides to it, right? Like there's like the human, like ethical side, right? Which is that we should be helping everyone with their mental well-being. But what I noticed, because I used to work for this company called WellHub, which is like a benefits platform, and it gives employees access to like gyms, apps that help with like, Headspace is one of them, for example. But the reason why the companies were going for it is because of they were able to prove a return on investment, right? So they're able to say, okay, cool, like if you invest in the well-being of your employees, physical, mental, social, financial well-being, then that leads to them being more productive. And then the leadership are like, okay, cool, like business case, we can get productivity higher, and then that's why we invest in mental well-being. But I'm just wondering, is that one of the reasons why you think that we started to focus on it more? Because it sounds like what you're saying is, are we doing it right? Well, because I would say, because the reason we're doing it is to increase productivity, which may be the wrong way to approach it.
I think it is. We need these things that we're already doing, but I think we're just scratching the surface. And I think what we're doing now is we're sticking very efficient band-aids on maybe more of a bigger root cause. Because if you look at what's really going on, it's a bigger societal issue, right? We're feeling less resilient to address certain challenges. If you're looking at companies, it's all about saving costs and doing more with less people.
Yeah.
And I think the more, it's just a really hard balance to get, right? Because we are a business and we need to save costs and we want to be efficient, but at the same time, we want people to feel well and we want them to thrive. And finding the balance between the two is really hard. So once again, everything that we're doing and the positive developments are great, but we're doing it because we need to. And I think all these reorganizations, doing this more with less people is driving more people to feel that they can handle certain challenges. And that's why we're applying all of these resources. But that's my personal opinion. I'm curious how you both also see that.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true what you say, that a lot of people, we do a reorganization, let's implement, for example, open up, because people need somebody to talk about. And maybe that is indeed what you mentioned, the other way around. But me as a bit more new person in HR, just wonder, how do you then can turn around? What is the route that you talked about? Like what should companies do to make sure that all their employees feel supported and mentally well?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. One thing I was actually thinking about recently, because I speak to a lot of managers and lots of managers, they're overwhelmed, they feel very responsible, they're incredibly loyal.
Yeah.
And what you tend to see is that those people in the organizations who are the most loyal, who feel the most responsible, who work the hardest, tend to be the first ones to drop.
Yeah.
Because those qualities that have gotten them to where they are the same qualities that can become their pitfall.
Yeah.
And if you look at an organization, what I've seen is that we tend to promote and reward those people who work the hardest, don't say no as much. They tend to take on more responsibility. They really want to prove themselves, which again, they're great qualities. But if we keep promoting and rewarding those qualities, those are going to become the leaders that then are going to try and lead by example to the people within the company. So I think if we could maybe also recognize that we as leaders need people that challenge us. We need people who can set boundaries. We need people who can realize that work is just work. And if we can also recognize those qualities more and reward those qualities more, I think we can maybe create more of like a positive change in work ethic and not just seeing people who are constantly busy and always working hard and overworking as kind of the norm.
Yeah.
But that's a thought I'd recently been having. I don't have anything data-wise to support this, but this is just what I'm seeing based on the one-on-one conversations I have, but also the group sessions I have with managers, and I suppose also in my own experience in working in HR as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I do see that a bit, right? You see like leaders, particularly like when they're founding their own companies or scale-ups, and they're like, yeah, when I used to work in whatever company, we used to work until 2 a.m. And then they expect that from everyone else. And then it's like, I always say to the leadership of a company, like, if you want to work super hard, go for it. But you're getting paid more than everyone else, and you're getting rewarded a lot better. So yeah, you can't expect that from everyone. But I think it's really interesting what you say as well, because you can, what I call like go into the red, and going into the red is like working super hard, working more hours, like being super helpful to the company. But you can only do that for a certain amount of time before you burn out, right? And so, but I think it's a really interesting observation that you made, that the people that are overstepping their boundaries are the ones who are getting rewarded.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting that we can maybe, as companies or as HR or as employees, we can all play a role in that. In I think also honoring when people do the right things, or do the things that, set the boundaries, or good for your mental well-being.
Be resilient.
Yeah.
And how can organizations or leadership maybe help then reduce this stigma, you think, and have more open conversations about this? How do you think they should start?
I'm a big believer in connection before content.
Okay.
So whatever meeting you're in with your team or management or colleagues, to just check in with each other. And it could be as silly as like I recently did one on a scale of 1 to 9, which cat are you? And we had like different pictures of different cats, and it seems like innocent, but then you ask, okay, but why are you the cat that's got like the paws in their head? Well, maybe because there's too much going on, or maybe you're the thriving cat because you're feeling great that day, and then that's also nice to hear. So I think taking that moment to check in, how is everyone doing? How are we feeling? What do we need? Is a great way to also get an idea of how is everyone doing, and what do they need from me as a manager or as a leader before you dive into whatever content is on the agenda.
I really like that. I really like that connection before content, because so often like you're in a meeting or you're on your video call or whatever, and even on Slack or Teams when you're messaging each other, and it's just like, boom, this is what I need from you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Rather than, I love that. Like, actually, I do this a lot. Actually, just at the start of the meeting, just say, hey, is there anything anyone wants to share before we start the meeting? And then if there is, then we talk about it. And then if not, then we go.
Yeah.
And even if you can then also start yourself. Like if I would be doing a check-in and I'd be saying, okay, so if we're a traffic light today, right? Green is feeling great, orange is like, not super, and red is like, not doing great at all. Which color are you? And then I might start saying, well, if I may start, I think I'm an orange today. I didn't sleep very well, quite a lot going on. And then I can maybe say how I'm going to address it. And then you're also setting the example for the others to open up as well.
And because what I've read is that still 60% of employees have never spoken to anybody or anyone about how they feel mentally. And I mean, indeed, setting an example as a leader in a room, like, hey, I'm feeling like this today, is a really good practical tip. Do you have any other practical tips for managers, how they can lead a bit by example to open up about this topic?
Well, I think it's also very personal, how vulnerable do you want to be? Everybody's going to be very different in that. But I think being that example in vulnerability, like I was just saying, is a great way.
Yeah.
I think following any kind of like trainings or workshop just in conversational skills. I mean, there's a reason why psychologists study years to become psychologists, right? There's such an art to asking the right questions, letting the right pauses, asking for consent when you want to have a certain conversation. I think that could be of huge added value. I think especially to managers. And I also recently read somewhere that we tend to see our managers more than our partners and our friends. So when you're thinking about mental well-being, there's such an important role that managers can also play in that.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a really important one. And I think I also just mentioned it, but I think asking for consent is really important. Like, are you okay to have this conversation right now? Can I ask you this question? Is it okay if I follow up with this? I think bit of a buzzword, I suppose, but the psychological safety that you're hearing a lot, I think those different things can really contribute to people feeling, safe and seen and heard.
Yeah.
One more thing that I've also noticed is that it's really valuable if leaders or managers can give follow-up to whatever has been addressed. So if I might go to my manager and say, hey, I'm a bit worried about this and this person or this and this happening, that they can then come back to me and say, this is what I've done with what you have addressed to me. Because that really makes me feel like I have a say, that I'm taken seriously. And it will also lower the threshold for me to maybe share something again in the future.
That's a really nice one. And let's say you are a manager and in your team, somebody is not feeling great, but you are not sure how to put your finger on it, let's say. So how can you maybe recognize symptoms of somebody that feels stuck or mentally not really great?
So first of all, I really want to recognize that that's hard, and often we see these things happening. But we don't feel equipped to address it. And it's very easy to be like, I'm sure it'll be fine. Or, that your own kind of anxiety or worry about doing or saying the wrong thing gets in the way from actually doing anything. And I think the most important thing is to remember is that how you make someone feel. And the fact that you're addressing something is showing that you care. So really connecting to your intention is I want to help. Doesn't really matter what I say in essence, but the fact that I'm reaching out shows to that person that I care. So maybe that's the first thing. So knowing that whatever you say, at least you're trying. And when you're maybe seeing signals in someone, first of all, just maybe keep track of the things that you're seeing. Like, are they maybe becoming late to meetings, or they come across as a bit chaotic, or they're not reaching deadlines, or they're less active in meetings where they usually take a very active role. And then again, asking consent. Is it okay if I have a chat with you? Do you mind if we go somewhere? I have some things I want to address. So that you give them a little bit of a feeling of autonomy. Like I can also say no if I want to. And then just stating the things that you've seen. Nothing about them as a person, but just, hey, I've noticed this, and this. And then asking them, do you recognize any of these things? And I think that is already an amazing start that you can have, because that can really open the floor to hear, what's going on.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes employees don't feel safe talking about a topic because they feel stuck, or they're not happy with their job anymore, but they're so scared to lose their job or to get a bad performance review that they rather not talk about it. And then, especially now in Amsterdam and in a lot of cities, cost of living is so high that people just hold on to this job because they really need it, but then they feel stuck and they cannot move. So maybe also, Paul, from your experience as a HR leader, how can you help these type of employees that they don't have this feeling that they're stuck? Or maybe for you as well, this question.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I really like a lot of stuff that Emma's saying in terms of like about asking for consent. And what I notice is when you're talking a lot about asking questions. Yeah. And I think it's about, just making sure there's the space to have like the conversation. So making sure that they know you're approachable. I think also the follow-up one is a really good one. So like these kind of things I think are really good. Also as well, it's important to make sure you're aware of like what are like the options you have to help, right? Yeah. What tools do the company have? Maybe they have Open Up, for example, and like what other tools are available. And also you're obviously we have like people in culture teams in companies. They're making sure like managers are talking to like their HR business partners and talking about each person in their team to see if we can start to spot the signs. But I think what Emma said, when you start to see changes in behavior, that's when you're a bit like, like I wonder what's going on here. Maybe that was someone who was like super chill before, is all of a sudden being quite like impatient or irritable. Opening conversation on
the conversation, and then you have the conversation, but sometimes then this person still feels like, okay, I'm not happy at the moment in my role. Yeah. Like what things can you do to make sure that somebody then makes a switch as a manager? Because sometimes talking to a psychologist or a coach is not always resolving the problem. It's helping maybe, but
I think for me it comes down to like building trust in the first place. Like if you no one's gonna open up to you if they don't trust you.
No, that's true.
So it's really important that you're building trust in the team, and you've probably read or seen like Brené Brown talking about the power of vulnerability. So making sure like you're sharing your own personal stories so people will open up to you. I mean, there are other solutions you can have, like the feelings like maybe you can look at doing like a different role, changing their role in the company. Maybe there's like responsibilities you can take off them. So I think there's lots of different things you can do, but like you can't help someone unless they want you to help.
No,
this is why like what Emma's saying about asking for consent.
So we actually have a group session about this kind of conversations and how to go about them, and we always talk about also prepare for a no. And that it's also their right to say no because you're asking for consent. Yeah. And it also really depends, of course, on the level of severity of what's going on. So if there's maybe mild signals that something might not be going well, that you can always say, that's okay for now. Please know that you can always reach out to me. also, indeed, as you were saying, make them aware of the resources that there are within a company that they can, maybe you're just not the right person for them to reach out to. And that's also okay, as long as they do reach out to someone.
Yeah.
But that if there's maybe more severe things going on, can always stress that the reason that you're asking is because you're worried about them as a person.
Yeah.
And that it's your intention to help them, not to, whatever they might think that might be going on.
Yeah.
But I think really staying away from assuming anything about why they are behaving the way they are, because you really have no clue. Even psychologists can't read minds.
No.
But just letting them know that you're there, that the resources are there, and that they can always reach out if it's needed.
Yeah. Okay, that's nice.
I like this topic of saying like I'm worried, because in my own personal case, that's what happened to me. My manager just started saying, "I'm really worried about you," and that was the moment I was like, "Well, actually, I'm not like doing that great right now."
Yeah.
And then, oh, really? You can tell. Yeah, I mean, feeling not that great.
Yeah.
And we're now talking about what to do when somebody is stuck or not feeling great, or maybe moving towards a burnout. But how can you prevent it?
The $1 million question.
Yes, tell us.
So there's actually a really interesting white paper that SBS NIP has written. So NIP is the Dutch Institute of Psychologists, and I'm sure they have them in other countries as well. But it's really about understanding, and they put it into a really nice visual, that when people go into burnout, it's not something that happens instantly.
No.
It's almost like you have a pan of water, and before it starts boiling over, which will then represent burnout, there's a lot of phases the water goes through, right? It needs to get warm first, then maybe a little smoke's coming off, then the water starts to bubble, and then it gets a bit wavy, and at some point it will go over. So when you're thinking about burnout, it goes through the same kind of phases. So it's first important to know how is someone when they're feeling well. Yeah. And of course, as a manager, you can get input from that. The same thing I said about the traffic light. What if everybody just fills in a traffic light? When am I in green? What are my warning signals? Yeah. And what are signals that it's really not going great? And then you as a manager can have that as kind of like an overview of your team, or that people feel responsible to keep track of these things themselves. Mm-hmm. And then to realize, okay, what are maybe the first signals that someone isn't doing well? Maybe they're noticing it's more hard to get to sleep at night. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're waking up a little bit more tired. And maybe then those can regress into something worse, aka I'm still feeling tired on the weekends, or I'm starting to cancel things that usually give me energy. And that can go on into I'm just needing lists all the time to be able to keep track of things. Like sleep just isn't enough. And that, of course, can then get worse and worse. And then you can get to what we all know as burnout, that somebody's just not functioning at all anymore, and there's no energy for anything. So I think recognizing that it has these different phases, and when we're talking about prevention, I think the bridge of feeling well, so kind of the green recharged battery, going on into slightly orange, so maybe the tired phase, mm-hmm. is where you can make the most difference. So really being aware of what small signals could be present in your colleagues or in your team can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And let's say indeed then somebody is in this orange space. Is there something, you notice it, you talk about it, like you're in the orange space. Is there something that they can do to maybe go back to the green, or that you as a manager can do to help them go back to the green?
Yeah. So I always find it a really hard role as a manager, like where is your responsibility in this? And I think the more recharged they are in the battery, the more someone is able to do themselves. Yeah. So even just talking about what they might need from you mm-hmm. as a manager, and I think specifically for them, just mentioning the impact of rest and breaks. I think that's the most important thing you can do to prevent them from slightly going into orange, and making sure that there's a balance between the things that cost energy and that give energy. Yeah. So those are kind of like the main things you can keep in your mind. And then I think it's really up to the employee themselves, of course, to implement these things. And you can always say, hey, maybe let's check in our next check-in together about how these things are going. And if there's anything you need from me, just let me know. Yeah. And obviously, the more someone's battery becomes depleted, the more forceful in a way you as a manager can be, up to the point that you're just saying, close your laptop, you're going home right now. That's of course the most extreme. But I think there's all the elements of having them take time off. And also maybe in this white paper, they also talk about different dimensions of things that can contribute to burnout. So it can be things like workload. It can be the feeling of autonomy or control they have about their time and their work. It can be how they're being rewarded, the sense of community, how their work is connected to their values. Yeah. So if you have an idea of where the pain point at work is, and it can be multiple ones, of course, those are buttons that you can turn on. So if someone isn't feeling valued or rewarded, well, what can we as a company or what can you as a manager do? If someone feels like they don't have a say in decision making, that's also something you can do. But you need to, through a conversation, find out what are those pain points. Yeah. And also always recognize it usually isn't only work. No. There's usually other things going on as well. It can be things going on at home or in their personal life. They could have personal vulnerabilities as well that also play a role. So it is a very complex dynamic, but we tend to see that work is the thing that you can turn most buttons on to really make a difference for someone.
Yeah, and I think I've heard this, or someone used this analogy once with me, and they were like, your mental health is like a chair, so a four-legged chair, and like each leg represents a different part of your life. So one is, your partner, let's say, was one leg. The other leg is your friends and family. And then like another one is your health. And then the other one is work, right? So if one of the legs falls, on a four-legged chair, if one of the legs falls off, you can still sit on it, right? So what that means is if I have a problem with my health, I can still work, I can still handle that. If I have a problem in my personal life, my health is good, I can still handle it. If I've just had a breakup, but work's going well, I have my friends and have my health, then I'm okay. But it's when, let's say I just had a breakup and also I'm not enjoying work, or there's some problem at work, then two of my legs have fallen off and now my chair's falling over.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Yeah. And I think always just to be mindful that everybody's different in the amount of legs they have to lean on. So I think also getting an idea of that is also important.
And you mentioned also feeling feeling a bit that you have flexibility. After COVID, of course, a lot of people could work remotely, sometimes even 100%. Do you also think having this more flexible working environment where you can work from home whenever you want, or whenever you want, a few days a week, helps with mental well-being?
I think it helps for some and it doesn't help for others.
Yeah, depends.
Again, people are very different. Some people love the flexibility because it's easier for them to pick up their kids from daycare or from the parents. The other people, they notice that work's just too overcrowded, so they like to have their focus time at home. So having that flexibility can really feed into that sense of autonomy, and I can decide how I work, when I work. And there are people who really crave structure and really crave those clear boundaries between work and private life. And you can imagine if they're working from home all the time and they can basically work anytime, anywhere, then it might be more difficult to switch off. It's so easy just to check your emails then before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning. So I think it has pros and cons, and it's very personal.
Yeah, definitely true. How can an employee then, for example, set healthy boundaries to protect their own mental well-being and to become a bit more resilient, let's say?
I think maybe first important to recognize what boundaries are. I think a lot of the time we think boundaries is just me saying no to things, but it could also be expressing how you want to be treated, or expressing what your needs are, or speaking up when someone isn't behaving according to whatever code of ethics there might be, or saying that something's not okay to someone. Could also be physical boundaries, like I'm going into my focus time, my headphones are on, please don't disturb me right now, or this is the day that I work from home. So those are also all kinds of boundaries. So I think that's important to first understand. And then if you find it hard to set boundaries, because I don't think this would be a topic unless we found it hard to do. Maybe first to understand, why do I find it challenging to set boundaries? boundaries, they tend to go against our desire to be liked and connected to other people. And I think it's a very normal thing to find it hard. First of all, I think there's hardly anyone I know is like, yeah, I just love setting boundaries all the time. Yay, let's go. No, we don't see that very often. And then if there is a need to set a boundary and you want to set a boundary, there's obviously a signal that your body or your mind is giving you for this. So again, checking in with yourself, what am I noticing? Am I super tired all the time? Am I really frustrated with that colleague who just keeps asking questions? So what is your body and your mind saying that says, hey, I need a boundary? So I think that's a really important one. And then when you have an idea of the boundary that you want to set, maybe going back to that point of why is it challenging, and then think, okay, how can I maybe challenge this? AKA maybe on the short term, it's nice to people please or just to say yes, but on the long term, it might become too much for me and then nobody's going to benefit from me feeling a certain way.
Yeah.
And then when that is clear, then you can think about, okay, how am I going to set that boundary? What am I going to say? And how am I going to say it?
And what do you think a manager or a leader can do to help make sure that everybody knows in the team what your boundaries are, to maybe have like a framework or a README or something like that in place to make sure that everybody knows what each other's boundaries are? Do you have any tips on that?
Funny enough, actually, the thing I'm more thinking about now is like, it sounds like the role of the manager is quite hard, right? And I was thinking about this yesterday because, and we were talking before how one of the main things that affects your mental health is your relationship with your manager.
Yeah.
Right. But I've seen, managers managing huge teams. So let's say they're managing 15 people, right?
Yeah.
You're one of 15 people.
Yeah.
Them, right. Whereas to you, that your manager. Do you see what I mean? So like the relationship to you with your manager is way more important than their relationship with you.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like most managers I've seen like really supportive of their teams, really want to help the team and grow, but they're managing 15 people, whereas you just have one manager. And just one thing I was thinking about before on this psychological safety topic, and is that I sometimes think that people think psychological safety is about wrapping people up in cotton wool, which is not, by the way, and we can talk about it in a second. But the flip side of that is, if, let's say you, Flo, you want to grow and develop, you need to be challenged, right? Like if we're in the comfort zone, we're not growing. If we're in the panic zone, we're not growing either. So we want to keep people out of the panic zone. We want to keep them in the middle. So we need to apply like a little bit of pressure and stress people a little bit to get the best results, not just for the business, but for them. So yeah, I'm thinking like the role of the manager is quite hard in all of this.
How to find balance.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is different people have different stress resilience. So, but yeah, I just wanted to ask Emma, like on the psychological safety topic, like how do you define it? Because indeed, it's not wrapping people up in cotton wool, right?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that you're voicing, because I think a lot of the time when we're talking about psychological safety, about mental well-being, it's all about preventing negative outcomes, right? People going into burnout and etc. But there's this massive element of, okay, but how can we make people thrive and feel resilient? And pressure can also be a privilege, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's trusting you with responsibility. You have made it this far. You can make a real difference. So I think really emphasizing that there's also that element as a company. And I recently read a really interesting statement, a term, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's corporate psychological responsibility.
I like it.
Yeah, I was like, okay, interesting. And it was really about the kind of shared responsibility that there is between employees and companies to, on the one hand, indeed prevent these negative outcomes, but also focus on helping everyone feel well so that they can thrive. And then this big element of making sure that people have learning and development opportunities, that they feel that their skills are matched towards the work that they're doing, that there's resources available if people need help.
I really like your answer, like looking at it, flipping it around, because one thing we talk about a lot as well, if we invest in people's strengths, and getting them to do work that they like, gives them energy, and then they can use their strengths, and they're way more engaged. And also your point about like corporate psychological responsibility, which is CPR, right?
I suppose so, if you're using acronyms already.
And yeah, when a word's we live in a capitalist society, right? And actually, within a capitalist society, companies can be a really good driver of social change. But there's a balance, right? Because we have, at the same time, companies need to make money. So there's always this balance of, yes, we want to like prevent burnout, etc., etc. But then we also need to like hit our goals. And I think that's the role of the manager to say, when is this person's welfare more important than the business goal?
Yeah.
Right. But I really like what you said, Emma, about, flipping it around and saying, instead of saying, how do we stop burnout? How do we stop depression? What can we do? Actually, flip it around. Well, how can we make people thrive? I really like that approach.
And I think this was about psychological safety. So I think going back to that, it's indeed not just wrapping people in warm blankets and providing them resources and coaching and psychological support all the time, but it's also helping them build feelings of resiliency and autonomy, and I have influence over myself, I'm able to set boundaries, etc. So I think all the things that we've just been discussing about can contribute to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I've even had this before, like when we're talking about high-performing teams. And when you join a high-performing team, it can be really scary because like they have really ambitious goals. Everyone is like superstar amazing, and you get this huge imposter syndrome. You're like, oh my God, how can I how can I help this team? But the team comes together, they work hard, they work well together, and then they hit their goals. And then when you hit your goals, business objectives, whatever it is, then actually that feels great, and that is the moment when you feel like, I am thriving, actually.
Yeah, nice.
And sometimes you do need to suffer a bit to develop, right? They say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we're talking about our comfort zone, that's how I always explain it to clients, is comfort zone is nice. That is that warm blanket. It feels good. I feel capable. I feel confident. But if we want to grow, which most of us do, and develop, we need to take those steps outside of our comfort zone, which is per definition uncomfortable. Yeah. And we need to go through those feelings of discomfort to get to stretching your comfort zone even more. So I think that's an important thing that you mentioned, that, we sometimes need to go through that as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also that really relates to the thing you said at the beginning, that now it feels like Band-Aid sticking, preventing burnouts. But I feel like the root is really indeed, how can you make your people thrive? That is, I think, and if people are thriving, you don't have that problem of burnout, so people feel stuck. So thank you. Really interesting.
Yeah, and one other thing I've noticed as well is when, in the workplace, when people are complaining about these issues and then they're taking like longer sick leave, etc., then sometimes you just have the conversation with them and say, do you actually enjoy your job?
Yeah.
And they're like, actually, no, not really.
No.
And you're like, okay, well, let me help you. I can, obviously I understand you have bills to pay. You can't just quit straight away, but let me help you. I can maybe introduce you to people with my network, find you a new position that's more suitable for you.
Yeah.
That's where I think the trusting comes in. Like if you've got a relationship of trust and that person's happy to say that to you without fear. And I think that's what psychological safety is, right? Happy to say things without fear of repercussion, right?
Exactly. And I think also really recognizing that common humanity, like everybody struggles with things, we all do, and we need each other to get through it. We often can't do it alone. That's why we have communities and societies, etc. And it's the same within a company. It's exactly that. It's a community in a way, and sometimes we need to help each other out in that.
Right. Thank you so much, Emma. I do want to end with maybe a little practical tip to make it a bit smaller. So what can you as a manager, for example, do on a day-to-day, a small thing to support the mental well-being of your employees, like a small exercise or something that they can do before a meeting, or anything?
Well, I always like to say, be the change you want to see. So maybe starting with yourself. Yeah. One thing I tend to do between sessions, I never have a lot of time between my sessions, and that is just close my eyes, take 5 deep breaths, and it can be all the difference from going into a meeting feeling like this, and feeling like this. So I think if you do that to yourself, you also exert a certain energy to your team, right?
Yeah.
And then I think the other biggest practical tip is what I mentioned before, the connection before content. And you have loads of things that you can find online by different companies, but maybe just keeping it simple from what I mentioned before, that traffic traffic light and doing that with your team once in a while to get an idea of how everybody is doing and really having that connection to build that trust before you go into the content.
Right. Thank you so much for coming. I thought it was really interesting. I learned a lot. And audience, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.